Okay, we're going to do William Faulkner's Rose for Emily today. This is usually a pretty popular one, actually, among my students. Again, when we're in the classroom, I usually start this out. This in Hemingway's Hills for White Elephants, which is even shorter than this one, and I actually read them almost like the way I do the poetry in full in class, and sort of break it down line by line. Not sure if that would really work. Me reading that long into the camera here, so and I don't have a teleprompter to make it look like I'm looking at you while I do it. I think I'll just give a short lecture here. And boy, I tell you what, William Faulkner, he could be the greatest American novelist. You could definitely make an argument for that. He has fallen out of favor, a little bit. In the last couple of decades, somewhat his style has gotten a bit laborious. He did write and not in this story, by the way, so much, but most of his most famous works, had that sort of stream of consciousness style. Most famously, Sound and the Fury, that takes his title from the famous Macbeth speech, and some of that is almost unreadable. It really is. It's almost bad writing, but some of it's also kind of amazing. The ending, especially. But anyway, he wrote in this very style, sort of like you're literally inside somebody's mind and into their thoughts, and you're not getting any grammatical structure, and it's just this sort of free flow thing, and it can be very difficult at times to read. He can be obtuse and sometimes even unnecessarily difficult, but he can also touch brilliance and greatness, and his writing really has the power of myth to it. It's that sort of a dense and sort of pregnant with meaning, all of it. And this story, I think, is like that. It's also very quite accessible, I think. Let's see. Faulkner's also writing in the shadow, as a few writers we studied this semester are, of the fall of the Old South, right? And here we get the story of poor little Emily Grierson, whose death begins the tale, and whose life we're going to learn quite a bit about, including some grim aspects of it. And the opening lines here: when Miss Emily Grierson died, our whole town went to her funeral. The men, through a sort of respectful affection for a fallen monument, the women, mostly out of curiosity to see the inside of her house, which no one save an old manservant, a combined gardener and cook, had seen in the last 10 years. So again, men, out of respect for a fallen monument, that's a strange way to describe an old lady, right? But she is very much a representative figure here. Everything, it seems like everything in his house or in this story, and often in all Faulkner's worlds, seems to carry the weight of symbols and just simple would be a better way of phrasing that. And Miss Grierson, again, it's not just, she's a very much representative of the Old South, the fallen South. And again, that's, that was the South that owned people, right? And her people were top of the food chain. They might have been, it isn't implied that they were literal plantation owners, but they, once upon a time they might have been. And at the very least, they were the sort of landed aristocracy in this town. And you can see there's a certain amount of resentment toward her and her whole family from the rest of the town. But also, they seem to sort of need her to hold that place. It's sort of like the way a kingdom needs its king, even if it does hate and resent it. Everyone seems a little bit lost, with the fall of the old status quo in this world. And there's a line just a little bit later, right? Alive, Miss Emily had been a tradition, a duty, and a care, a sort of hereditary obligation upon the town. I mean, that is sort of what the she's like, and she sort of wields this power over people, and she seems to be, and again, she's sort of presented as this like maybe 5 feet high, maybe even 4'10", sort of little old a woman who refuses to pay taxes. That's one of the things that's going on here, and they keep sending her tax bills. She's like, I owe no taxes in Jefferson, gentlemen, and I don't go out anymore. She just refuses to pay him. And again, this is still okay, even though the old South has fallen, and those old aristocrats and the landed gentry there are no longer those old, beautiful, which also were kind of, that had evil in them too. Let's not forget it. The most evil institution this country has created were what were holding up those count mansions, but she she seems to bring the power of all of that to her, and even though that's all fallen away, a lot of the sort of norms and mores, and there's a sort of chivalric code, and again, you really can kind of compare the old South a little bit to, I think, to feudal Europe, right, where you have castles and the knights and the serfs and all that, and the lords, and you have the plantation, the mansions instead of the castles, and you have slaves, and obviously instead of serfs, and where you have the chivalric code, where the knights will save the damsel in distress or whatever, especially the King Arthur, or chase the great quest for the child's in the Arthurian legends. Here you have this very intricate system of manners in the Old South, and that is still alive and well. And you even some of the men, there's one judge who they're like, her house starts to smell really bad, and she'd mysteriously gone to buy arsenic. Which is a strong poison sometimes used for killing rats, which is what the druggist. And again, the druggist says, "You have to tell me what you're buying this for." Miss Grierson, and she just sits there, looks up at him, and stares him down until he finally gives in. He can't take it, and gives her the rat. And he writes 4 rats, like on there, like as if to alleviate himself of any responsibility. And again, thinking she's going to kill herself is what he's worried about, or what he's worried about anyway. But anyway, there was a terrible smell coming out of Miss Grant, and it was like, you have to say something to her, right? They try to find somebody of authority, which is a local judge, and he's like, well, wow, come on now, would you have me accuse a lady to her face of smelling bad, right? You don't talk that way to a lady in this. It's just like you stand up still when a woman walks into the room or something, and all those sorts of manners are still sort of alive and well in the South, and they kind of take pride in that. And it's sort of insulating her and keeping any of them. And again, even though their past is gone and dead, the worst fits, it's not done with them, right? And they can't quite get out from the clutches of it in here. And so what ends up, and again, these are the most powerful men in the town, right? The leaders of this town kind of get together and they decide they're going to just sprinkle some lime on whatever. They figure some animal or something died in the basement. That seems to be where the smell is coming from, and they do it. And somebody goes down with a sack of lime and sort of sprinkles it around. And they come up, and as they're and again, it's like little boys. And again, these are the most powerful. These are the leaders of the town. And as they're sneaking off, a light goes on. They look, and they kind of look backwards, and there's Miss Grierson. I got almost imagine it like that scene in Psycho. With the old lady in the window in the rocking chair, and she's just sort of sitting there silhouetted. In the rocking chair, staring out at him, like this. But again, it's amazing the amount of power she's. The Faulkner's always instilling in her. And we do get we get that remarkable sort of, we learned her story, which was that she was a bit of an old maid and one of those. Her spinster aunts, that sort of figure. And, her father, her mom died when she was young, and her dad kind of turned her into his wife, at least in the sense of domestic duties. And, whether or not it went, beyond that, and again, Faulkner does like to dabble in use incest in often in symbolic ways, in his stories. And there is, it's very. There's nothing in this story saying that outright by any means, but there is, it's sort of, this a remarkable image of I'm trying to see if I can find it here. I don't know if I'm going to. We'd always thought of them as a tableau. Let me see. We had long thought of them as a tableau. Miss Emily, a slender figure in white in the background. Her father, a spraddled silhouette in the foreground, his back to her and clutching a horsewhip, the two of them framed by the back-flung front door. And so that image, of she would always been sort of behind the father, the patriarch who still meant something in this town, and him with a bullwhip, right? Not too phallic and simple there, and kind of keeping the men off, and she never does, right? But then she does after the father died, and then of course, attaches herself as such women often will to her father, maybe too much, and then he dies, and now it's just her in this big house, right? And she refuses to accept his death for 3 days, and again, refusing to let the past go, right? She's gonna the past, like, clutching on. It almost reminds you of that opening scene in with the Wuthering Heights, with the ghost, all you can see is these sort of fingernails holding on like that to a window pane, and she seems to hang on. She refuses to even admit he died. And they're like, people are talking, and they don't know what they're going to have to do. And then finally, after 3 days, she sort of gives in, and they do have a proper burial. Later on, there is a suitor, right, Homer Barron, who comes in and sort of, again, he's the Yankee from up north who comes down and kind of, which is a bit of a how shall I put this? Invasion's a little too strong, but a bit of an occupying sort of force, a little bit. And he's bringing modernity and all kinds of things. These paving roads, all where it's going to be, the horse. Again, they're proud of their horse riding skills and everything down south, and this is all changing. And he's part of who's bringing down that change. And Homer Barron also, as it's stated, sort of very much like the company of men, and homosexuality absolutely implied, much more forcefully, I think, in this case here. But he does sort of take a shine to Miss Emily, who's, again, not quite an older maybe woman now, but not an old lady. She's not the old lady she is at the literal beginning, but the chronologically the end of the story. And they start spending an awful lot of time together, and it is a bit of an outrage on the town who likes gossiping about it, and they're sort of liked seeing her taken down a peg or two, having this sort of what seemed to be an illicit affair with a younger man, and but then also sort of like it just isn't proper. And again, a little bit like the king is free to be anything but not be the king, or do whatever he wants except not be the king. Miss Grierson, there's an obligation from them to Miss Grierson, which she fully takes advantage of, right, by refusing multiple times to pay those taxes, but she also has a kind of obligation for a certain sort of standing and to conduct herself a certain way. And again, having a sexual fling like this with a younger man, and a northerner, a Yankee no less, it really is almost a minor cataclysm in this little town. And again, they do kind of think maybe she is going to marry him, but then all of a sudden he just sort of vanishes and disappears, and she becomes kind of a shut-in after that. She does give these china painting lessons and things like that, where again some of the mothers in town still send their daughters in this sort of old southern traditional way, but it's getting this dwindling and getting less and less. And she, as we do though find out, we get back to that story with the arsenic, the daughter wondering what it was, and when she does die, they finally do break it. I'm going to turn on my light here. Sorry, this is going to change. I just can't quite see. And it's one of the great sort of plot twists and endings that ever habits. And I'll just read this a little bit here, but it's worth doing. The violence of breaking down the door seemed to fill the room with pervading dust. And again, everything old, like we were going into a literal tomb, right? A thin, acrid pall, as of a tomb. Again, seemed to lie everywhere upon this room, decked and furnished as for a bridal, upon the valance curtains of the faded rose color, upon the rose-shaded lights, upon the dressing table, and, everything covered in dust, right? The delicate array of crystal in the man's toilet things, backed with tarnished silver so tarnished that the monogram was obscured. Among them lay a collar and tie, as if they had just been removed, which left upon the surface a pale crescent in the dust. Upon the chair hung the suit, and carefully folded beneath the two mute shoes and the discarded socks. The man himself lay in the bed. And then I was like, whoa, there's not supposed to be a man in this room. There hasn't been a man in this house for years. For a long while, we just stood there, looking down with a profound and fleshless grin. This is a mummified corpse they're looking at, okay? The body had apparently lain in the attitude of an embrace, but now the long sleep that outlasts love, that conquers even the grimace of love, had cuckolded him. What was left of him, rotted beneath what was left of the nightshirt, had become inextricable from the bed in which he lay, and upon him and upon the pillow beside him lay that even coating of the patient and biding dust. And again, the dust keeps coming back up, right? The ancient dust, right? Then we noticed on the second pillow was an indentation of a head. Somebody had been laying on that pillow. One of us lifted something from it, and leaning forward, that faint and invisible dust, dry and acrid in the nostrils, we saw a long strand of iron-gray hair. And the iron-gray hair was what had happened after her father died. Her hair had gone gray. And there's just one strand of iron. So she'd been laying next to that corpse after she had... obviously, that's... Homer was for who the arsenic was for. She wasn't going to let him leave, and she does kill him. And literally, again, the woman who never did procreate, and again, that she was fallow, is also, she was a barren woman, is part of the story here. And that South. Old South, the terrible but also magisterial sort of history of the Old South sort of dies away very stubbornly, but does, and it dies with Miss Grierson, and in a kind of right down to a really warped, almost biblically sort of a warped sleeping arrangements. All right, that was Rose for Emily.